Welcome to the Jaros Health Podcast, where we make it easy for you to better serve older adults. This is the weekly Jerry on Ice segment that is a collaboration with the Institute of Clinical Excellence, the official Con Ed provider for the Jaros community.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday version of PT on Ice. My name is Christina Previtt. I'm one of the two lead faculty for the Modern Management of the Older Adult course. I'm sorry, my tripod is all over the place. I thought I had it. There we go. We're good. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Wednesday. It's been really busy in the MMOA world. We are working on some updates to the Modern Management curriculum that we're really excited about. And we are going to be in Asheville, North Carolina, the end of June 22nd. Good morning, Kelsey. And we have our online version of the MMOA course starting June 9th. So if you guys are interested in jumping onto the online 8-week cohort of Modern Management of the Older Adult, you should definitely do that because our next cohort is starting very soon and it's looking like it is going to be a ton of fun. It always is. So today I thought that I would talk to you guys about exercise snacks. So one of the things that comes up a lot when we start talking about exercise prescription for the older adult, especially for people who are in home health, skilled nursing facilities, acute care, is that Christina, Dustin, these exercise prescription guidelines are fantastic. This loading is great, but I can barely get my clients to want to do PT with me at all, not to mention doing these high intensity interval type circuits. And so what can we do about that? And so I started deep diving a little bit into Martin Gibala's literature. So if you guys don't know who Marty Gibala is, he's actually a Canadian researcher out of McMaster, which, fun fact, is where I am doing my PhD. But he started with a study that was published in 2012 that said even a minute of all-out exercise can make you fitter. And so it wasn't a 1 minute all-out sprint. It was actually 3 20-second sprint intervals with, I think, a 3-minute rest in between was his original protocol. So basically, it was a minute of work, and he showed that in previously inactive, healthy young adults that you could see improvement in VO2 peak, as well as aerobic capacity and power output, which is super interesting, right? Because we are looking at, our guidelines, which say 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity, 30 minutes a day. And based off some of this literature and some of the sprint interval training and high intensity interval training, the WHO, the World Health Organization, actually changed some of the guidelines. Instead of saying, in 30-minute bouts of exercise for aerobic training, it has to be in at least a 10-minute interval. And so that was because of some of this sprint training protocols, which said, even if you do 10 minutes of training 3 times a day, you'll still incur a lot of the benefits of aerobic training, even if you didn't necessarily have the time for 30 minutes. And so that was starting to address some of the perceived barriers of lack of time or lack of willingness to do a 30-minute aerobic session for older adults. And so what about exercise snacks? So what they've done with this literature is they've gone from, 3 times a week, we're going to do this 3 by 20 seconds with a 3-minute protocol. It's going to take about 20 minutes of the warm up and cool down. But by the time you get in there, do your 3 intervals and leave. What about if we just do 1 20-second interval at 3 different times throughout the day? So I thought this was a really interesting study because they called it sprint snacks. So they took individuals who were previously inactive, were not doing any sort of aerobic training or competitive sport between the ages of 18 and 35, and they got them to do these exercise snacks. So they compared it to sprint interval training. So they got one group to do 3 20-second intervals throughout a day, 3 times a week for 6 weeks, and compared it to a sprint interval training where they did more of a kind of a HIIT protocol, where I believe, I have it here so that I didn't forget. Yeah, so they had like 2-minute warm up. They did a 20-second sprint, 3-minute recovery, and they did that a couple of times. So they did it all in one chunk, and then they compared. And what they showed was that in 6 weeks, both groups incurred VO2 peak improvements. Both had improvements in power output, and both improved their time in a 150 kilojoule watt aerobic test. And there was no between group differences. So both of them improved over time, but there was no significant difference between the sprint snacks and the sprint interval training. And so this was really interesting to me because it showed that, for example, if I have an older client who does not want to do exercise, then I would say, okay, give me 5 minutes. And then you do a little bit of a warm up, you do an all out effort, and all out is totally relative. We can do an RPE scale, and then you do a little bit of a cool down and say like, that's it, you're done. I'll come back in a couple of hours. And so the rest interval in this study was between 1 hour and 4 hours. That being said, it was only 6 weeks, and there was there was differences. The snack group was a little bit less than the interval training group, and I have to question if the study was a little bit longer, if we would start to tease out some of those differences. But the clinical take home that I had was, if I have a client who does not want to do aerobic stuff with me, and I want to put him on a cardiac rehab protocol, for example, can I at least do this and start to see some benefits, start to see some recovery, start to see some improvement from a cardiovascular perspective? And then once they feel a little bit more empowered, potentially a little bit more confident in their capacity to be able to do this type of interval work, then I can start to increase the duration. And this is not to say that low intensity steady state or moderate intensity steady state isn't beneficial, because it absolutely is. This is for examples, which we get a lot in the older adult course when we're talking with clinicians in different settings about how do we get people to do at least something. And so this was a really great study that kind of looked at that. And so I know you're probably thinking, Christina, this was in inactive individuals between 18 and 35. This protocol has been validated in people who were active, people who are inactive, people who are overweight, and people who have type 2 diabetes. So they're starting to expand the patient population that they are using this protocol with. But fair point, this has not been done with older adults. And so actually in today's Hump Day Hustling, you're going to see a study about high intensity concurrent training in older adults. And so I'm kind of blending these two to give a clinical impression that is going to help me with practice. And so this study was published, I believe it was in March, in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, and was looking at doing high intensity interval training where you were doing 20 seconds of work, 40 seconds of rest, and you were alternating between an endurance and a strength-based movement, and compared that to a low intensity aerobic training program, which actually had about 40% increased volume in terms of the time that it took to complete the program, and they compared the results. The really interesting part about this, so from an exercise perspective, I'm going to take one kind of aside, is that oftentimes people say concurrent training is better because they compare aerobic and strength training to aerobic alone or resistance alone. But what can happen as a product of that study is that people can be doing twice the amount of training because they do 60 minutes of aerobic and 60 minutes of strength. So one of the positives of this study is not only did they match the time, they actually said we got the concurrent high intensity mixed program done faster than the aerobic program. And so what they showed was that this was safe and that you saw improvements in muscle mass, body composition, fat-free mass went down, as well as gait speed went up in older adults who were doing this concurrent type of training. So over the study period, they started doing 20 seconds of work, 40 seconds of rest, alternating between an endurance and a strength exercise. And I was actually really impressed by the strength exercises that they were getting individuals to do. So the average age in the study was 71 to 73. So we have a community dwelling older adult population, albeit relatively healthy. But they were having people doing medicine ball chest passes, farmer's walks, resistance band shoulder presses, hip marching, bench step-ups, resistance band rows, and they were alternating that with endurance exercises, and they were going through the circuit without any break other than the prescribed interval. And so in the first, I believe it was the first 5 weeks, they started with a 20 seconds of work, 40 seconds of rest paradigm. And they transitioned as they got to the end of the 12 weeks to a 40 seconds of work, 20 seconds of rest paradigm. So they saw that they were improving in terms of the amount of capacity they had to do work, and they would go through the circuit. So they showed all of these great cardiovascular strength and body composition improvements in the high intensity group, more so than the control group, and there were statistically significant differences between groups. So both improved, but there was enough of an increased improvement in the concurrent training, the high intensity group, that they were significantly different than the control. And so if we compare the Kabbalah study, which is the exercise snacks, and we think about how we're starting to get more and more studies that are looking at high intensity strength training. This was in a high intensity in terms of aerobic capacity, but we have trials like the Lift More trial and some of the work that I've done for my doctoral work that is loading people up with barbells, and we're showing a high intensity from a resistance applied perspective. If we combine these two, we're starting to see that people, especially who are healthy community dwelling older adults, are not as fragile as we would think that they would be, and that we can start to push the boundaries of what we can do even if we don't have a ton of time. And so the fitness athlete group has started with different things like the REMOM, where you're essentially doing these types of snacks or this interval training that is very similar to the study that was published, that's going to be out in Hump Day Hustling. And we're starting to have this growing, blooming amount of literature that is showing that, we can do a lot with our older clients. The only thing that I'm going to say about the 2019 study that's in Hump Day Hustling is that the characteristics of the individuals who were eligible for the study sometimes will not have a very good carryover to your caseload. And what I mean by that is they couldn't really be on any sort of medication that could impact the benefits of exercise. And things like beta blockers is going to attenuate the heart rate response to exercise. And so that may have been an individual who was excluded from the study. And as we know, in terms of cardiovascular medications, a good portion of our older clients can be on these medications, whether they should be or not, or whether we can try and get them off or not. But just to think about how we can directly translate. And so if we're going to kind of blend those two things together, so we have the Lift More trial, we have this building literature that talks about concurrent training, which is having people doing power training like med ball throws and partner med ball throws, all these type of things. And then we have Marty Gabala's literature that is saying that, we can see some improvements if we're even doing a 2-minute warm up, 20 seconds all out, 1 minute, and then you're done. So you go into your client's room, within 5 minutes, you've done one exercise and you've left, and you're still seeing some improvement, like some is better than nothing. We can start to blend those things. So for me, who's in outpatient orthopedics, I will probably go more towards REMOM, rehab every minute on the minute type of interval work, so that I can condense a lot of work into a short amount of time. But if I'm a clinician who's working in a SNF setting, a skilled nursing facility or a long-term care facility, and I have a client who really isn't interested or doesn't have the capacity to do a lot of work, they don't have very good endurance, I can maybe do 3 exercise snacks throughout the day and say, you know what, Mrs. Y, I'm just gonna come in and we're gonna do 5 minutes, not even, we're gonna do one exercise, we're gonna do it all out, and then I'm gonna go. And we just try and pick the biggest bang for our buck, and then we can leave. So we have now this continuum of where we can see improvement, where we can meet clients where they are. And if down the road, they're getting better from those exercise snacks and we can start to transition them into a REMOM, that's fantastic. And if they're interested in doing a little bit more endurance and we can get them doing aerobic work, that's perfect too. It's an and not or, right? Like as the ICE faculty, we talk about this all the time. There are many different ways for us to work with our older clients. And I'm really excited for the direction that the geriatric literature is taking, because it's slowly starting to push those boundaries, think outside the box. And these instances are something that are very clinically applicable, because sometimes we see these studies and they just say, this is not feasible for me in my setting, but these are ways that we can start to encourage people to be more physically active and push their boundaries in a way that works in our setting. So I hope you guys found that helpful. If you guys are looking for the Gabala study, or if you are signed up to Hump Day Hustling, you will have the link to the concurrent high intensity study for older adults that was published this year. I believe it was the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. It is in your inbox. If you haven't signed up for Hump Day Hustling, do that, because you're getting access to really great studies just like this one that we're talking about on the podcast today, because it's so good. And we will continue to be talking about a lot of this work with exercise prescription in the older adult in subsequent podcasts. So if you guys have any other questions, let me know, comment below. Otherwise, if you haven't signed up for the June 9th MMOA course, what are you waiting for? You should definitely be doing that. And I will see a lot of you in Asheville, North Carolina at June 22nd. So it's only a couple of weeks away. I'm really, really excited. So have a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday. We will see you guys in a couple of weeks. And that is all for today. Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to the weekly Jerry on Ice segment of the Jaros Health Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, you should go to jaroshealth.com to check out our course offerings that will make it easy for you to better serve older adults. Once again, that's GEROS health.com and click on the courses tab. Thanks for listening.